Welcome back to Paper Labyrinths. My name is Nick,
I'm Brendan.
and today we're joined by Non-Breaking Space, the designer of Cross Bronx Expressway, a competitive city builder that simulates urban and societal development in the South Bronx between the years 1940 and 2000. He's also the designer of The Archivist's Dream, a hybrid RPG slash mega game. We'll get into that adaptation of the whirligig game John Company, which in itself is a game about the rise and fall of the British East India Company. And B, hi. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk to you.
Can I ask you, what is the genre you would describe the Archivist Stream as? Because I was writing that intro, I was like, I don't think, I think those words are right, but they're not fully right, if that makes sense.
So I think I would call it a voyeuristic journalist RPG.
Okay.
Journaling RPG.
Please say more, because I
think
bet
that's sort
the
of like
first one of those.
The seed of it really is like it was a journaling RPG. Was like the mechanics of it is basically writing a bunch. But it's a shared writing, so it's not like just you. So it's not a solo experience, though it can be played solo. It's just this sort of shared writing experience about the game. And so when you break it out and scale it up, it becomes more and more voyeuristic. Is what I think. It's just like seeing everybody just like getting into this writing mode and thinking about it from that perspective. Go ahead.
From the outside looking in, it almost looks like a solo RPG whose required materials is a live game of John Company happening in front of you.
Yes, I think that's the impetus is really around like the idea of an archive, and like in general, like I have a background in libraries and I've spent way too many times in stacks and stuff like that, and so the notion of an archivist collecting the history or putting together a history. And if you've gone to a library and opened up like a box and had to go through and pull all those materials out and say, okay, I'm going to do a collection based off of these materials or present that sort of based off of these materials. That's kind of like the inspiration for what the perspective of the game is, but the mechanics of the game are what are the history actually being made. So actually creating the things that are going to be inside of that box is what you're mechanically doing throughout the game. And the thing that you're commenting on is an actual game of John Company. And so it's a little bit meta.
Just to, I guess, step back and sort of explain what's all going on. So there is a board game, just an excellent board game called John Company, about the British East India Company. That you can play it. That's good. Then you could play The Archivist's Dream, wherein either you play John Company or there is John Company being played, because that line is a little bit fuzzy, especially when you get up to 50 people or whatever.
There's extant John Company.
Yeah, you then write letters, or sorry, you meaning the player inhabits a role in a family, which in the regular John Company, each player is a whole family. In the Archivist's Dream, each player can be one or more individual members of the family. You then write letters about what's happening in the game of John Company, taking on the perspective of someone from England who is sent to India to trade and or go to war or whatever, and then that creates the stack of letters that is then metaphorically put in a box for the archivists.
Exactly. And I think like I think the real actually inspiration for it came from before the second edition of John Company came out, when playtesting was going on. And in an early portion of the game, so in the game, individual players, it's up to 5 or 6, I can't remember, it's graded for.
I think it's 6.
Yeah. But the individual players represent families and they have pieces. And so they have, I think, something between 12 and 20 pieces that are their family members. And you then are putting those family members onto the board and sort of working from that space to in a worker placement type of fashion to take actions, though it's not quite worker placement, but they are placed on the space and then they take their actions based off of where they are in the space. And you're utilizing those family members to sort of increase the wealth of the family itself so that all the older people in the family can retire to big houses. That's like the goal, is to retire to the big houses.
Yeah.
Go
The game presents like your primary method of victory is entering high society and being idly rich.
Yes.
And not like necessarily making money in and of itself.
Yep. And so the British East India Company or John Company is the means by which you do that, and how you as a family are going to manipulate that to your own benefit. And it could be to the benefit of the company itself, or it could be to the great detriment of the company that you are able to profit off of and succeed in your goals. And so this whole framing of the family that is like the underlying piece of John Company has been there since sort of the first edition. And then as Cole was going through the second edition and doing these sort of iterations, he was trying to like refine it a little bit more, make it be a little bit more expressive. And there was one rule that I remember in an early playtest where there's a lot of negotiation that can happen in the game. And right now in the published version of the game, there are these promise cards that you can share in exchange for favors, right? And so you say you want to negotiate with this family, you give them one of your promises that says, hey, you can have my votes in the next election. I'm going to vote however you want in the next election, just so that you can do this action for me right now. And so this promise mechanic is really fun. It sort of really like ups the interaction of the game itself, and it can have some really good mechanical consequences as well. But in an earlier version of the game, you could also trade members of your family. And so you would give players pieces of your family, and then have that as they could then place your family wherever they wanted to, and that was the type of interaction. And I mean, it was, you can kind of imagine sort of the table talk of that level of play around like, yeah, I'll give you my son.
Yeah, of course.
You can take this. And
I don't care about this son. You can have him.
Exactly. So I think both from, it's from a mechanical perspective, and also like there's some underlying overarching sort of things that can happen when you have tables talking in that manner that wasn't necessarily, may have distracted from the game otherwise. So that was sort of shifted. And I think also the idea of promises, like that was always going to be something there. But anyway, for reasons that made sense, this part was pulled out of the game. But I think that there's also something about it that really speaks to what's at the heart of what the game is modeling. And this is just base John Company. And I think I said this at some point to some folks, I'm like, really what John Company, the game, is modeling is the conversations that are happening at the table. It is the talking about, hey, will you do this thing?
It's the boardroom negotiations more than the specifics of what's happening throughout the world, I guess.
Exactly. And what a lot of things that can happen, and this will probably take us to another part of the conversation later, but the way that we think about board games is so often about the board state. And what that board state is, that's what's remembered, or that's sort of like what captures it. But it's these interactions that happen at the table that really define what that experience was about. And you can't really always just point to the picture of the in board state and say, this was that game where
you could
blah, 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 blah,
blah. You could not recreate every conversation
exactly
leading into it. Yeah, of course.
Exactly.
This conversation between the three of us is very well timed, because Brendan has only played his first game of John Company a mere 6 weeks ago. And so Brendan, I've been waiting to ask you, did you feel gossipy or like a voyeur, or did you see like in the single player, or not the single player, I guess the normal version of John Company? Because that table talk, we had plenty of table talk, obviously. But you can sort of like, I don't know, imagine the gossip happening that would be happening in the simulated boardroom and then starts happening when you start playing with 20 people writing letters about everything they're seeing.
Absolutely. And like I think the thing that most excites me about games like that, like obviously the mechanics are really, really exciting. And I think for as exploitative a age and organization as John Company is, it's a spectacularly fun game to play once you wrap your head around it. But what thrills me about a game like that, and I think this is in part just because of what I sit down to board games to get, is that narrative, right? The narrative of, it's not quite role playing, but it is kind of role playing of, I am going to be operating as this particular family, and I am going to be um, pursuing an agenda in this particular way, and I'm going to bounce off of these characters, and I'm going to collaborate with these characters as represented by the other players, with with both the affordances that the game gives me, but also the very real social links that are present between me and the other human beings that are sitting around the table, right? Like I was thinking, as soon as I was looking at this stuff, I was thinking about every game of The King's Dilemma, or of honestly of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, where the game doesn't say you're a character that has these emotions and these qualities or anything like that. But every single time I play them, whether players mean to or not, those emerge through play. You always wind up when you're chasing down a mystery of, this is the one that likes interrogating NPCs. This is the one that likes roughing people up. This is the one that's good at studying clues. Even though there's absolutely like no like mechanical affordance to that. It's like, it's the freedom of the game saying, hey, you are this other person. You are this other entity, or this abstraction, right? Like you're technically like a faction within John Company, right? You're a family unit. You're not like even the patriarch or anything like that. And likewise in like King's Dilemma, you're playing a succession of nobles, right? Each game is like another generation in that. And so in that you wind up with people that have in a very very stereotypical Game of Thrones sense of like, oh, everyone from this family acts this way, but maybe each game they vary a little bit from one end of the spectrum to the other, et cetera, et cetera. All that is to say, yes, John Company fits the mold of what I'm looking for in that kind of experience, since that it's like an interesting, engaging kind of thing, but it's also a role-playing game in that way, right?
And I think that's what I really wanted to expand upon. It's just like being able to like pull out that and capture that, like to capture beyond the game state, what is it that actually happened in this game, and make that more tangible for the players of like, what is it that you actually did?
Right.
And the letter writing mechanic really just like focuses the players in on that. And I think that's, even when you get to scaling it up to like 50 players, that's the amazing thing of like that one-on-one interaction when I, as the archivist, go up to a player and say, okay, you just made that decision, and can you just write a letter to that player over there telling why it is that you're doing that, or what is it that you think is going to happen because of that, right? And that's my favorite way of prompting players is like, what is it that you think is going to happen because of the actions that you just taken, and write that letter, right? And that ends up being the vehicle from which the true characters of the players start to shine through into the experience, and the way that those interact with each other just becomes this wonderful, wonderful like little dance.
See, that even what you just said has awoken my GM reptilian brain of like prompting someone to think like, what do you think is going to happen? Has now primed that player to start acting differently in a way. Yes. Because now they're acting with fear/dread that thing is going to happen. And that's going to affect the decisions they make for the rest of the board game. That's beautiful. Yes. Mwah.
Yeah. It's the best. I mean, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing I find so fascinating about, or I guess maybe one of the bigger things I find fascinating about the Archivist stream is you have a system that is the game and the 100 years of the East India Company, or however many generations it is. And at the level of we all just sit down and play, everyone sees 100% of the game happening, and you're kind of speculating like, oh, what do I think? Are they going to try and crash the company? Are they going to try and buy workshops? Are they going to gun for prime minister? Right. So you have these like little slivers of uncertainty with the other players. But then if you take that system, especially in the version of the Archivist Dream where players, the letter writers, cannot see the board, right? And you then start dividing that 100% view up into 5% views or 1% views, because there's dozens of people playing. The game itself doesn't necessarily change, but because you have this keyhole view onto the system, you suddenly have to just speculate to a degree that is, just remarkable and realistic to some degree. That I think is like a really, really interesting way of kind of like illuminating how games and perception work, right? And how what does uncertainty mean in a game? It's like, well, it could be dice, it could be people, but it could also be like information in a very literal, like you don't know what's happening way.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the beauty that happened when we were able to scale it up. I think the time that we had run it before, it was played at a John Company count of 4. And so everybody still had all of the information. But once we started scaling it up so that the players were individual members of the family, or represented at times multiple, but at one time would be one individual family member, the amounts of not hidden information, but limited information scaled up incredibly. But it also really refined what your perspective was. And so the sort of duality of, okay, you are now with your family and you can have these conversations where you're going to strategize together around what do we want to do as a family? How are we going to build up the Sykes family to be the most important family in all of London, right? And then there's the tactics that'll sort of happen there. So it's like, okay, you're the director of shipping. So when you get up to there and to move the ships, make sure that you're putting those ships into place and let us know where we need to do. And so those things are happening. But then when it's time to go up to the board, it's just you. And then it's you and a member or two of these other families that have been doing the exact same thing, that have just been having their own
tips of the spear sat around the table, basically.
Exactly. And it's like trying to come up with these plans and then trying to execute these plans with that limited information, but feeling the collaborative spirit of the whole of your family behind you, I think is just an amazing back and forth that happens. And then to go and write a little private letter, it sort of takes you all the way around of like, I am a part of a big collective. I am by myself. I am for myself. Like those sort of, that shift really just creates amazing dynamics in the room.
What experience of bleed did you see when running this? Because there's been a lot of conversations very, very recently in the RPG ecosystem, specifically about bleed between player and character, and I could see, part of me. I just went on about, this is why I play these games. Part of me is here for it, right? But I could also see, depending on what kind of guardrails are there or not. And once you establish, particularly at a game like John Company, where if you are trying to bankrupt the company, then you are trying to do that secretly behind the backs of your collaborators. Like, what kind of dynamics and spillover did you see when running this?
So talk to me a little bit in terms of what you mean by bleed. Are you talking about bleed over in terms of personal or bleed over in another way?
Yeah, I mean, the actions that you take in the game affecting the way that you and your fellow players feel about one another as players, as opposed to representations in the game.
So I think that's a lot of that is around setup and like it's almost like it's your job as the GM in another game, to sort of say, okay, how am I going to set the boundaries around this play so that everybody has a sense of both what can happen to them and like allowance for that to happen, but also everybody has their own safety sense of what they can do in the inside of the space. So people die, like people are gonna die. You know?
Yeah.
Like there's character death that happens. There's definitely backstabbing and that level of things. I think when we did the last one, there isn't enough familiarity with everybody for it to feel personal, which is what it's just a question of like, if you were to do this with people that all know each other,
Right.
there are things that might come out that you as a GM have no sort of control
Sure,
over,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
But
The terror
when-
of having two people at your table that are dating each other.
Exactly. But in this context, it was really a matter of like, hey, in the setup, trying to create that safe space, and in pretty much every game and thing that I will try and run or do with folk, I try and be as upfront as I possibly can about that, because yeah, it's really easy to go over that line in the game space and not know that you're going over that line.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
So setting those
and
expectations front
very early. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
Yeah. And especially with a game like John Company, because there's no real good guys,
No.
right?
Not from your perspective
so-
at all. Yeah.
There's and in that sense, like everybody has to understand that they can be on the bad end of the stick. And yeah, just you sort of have to set that awareness up, especially like there's the other side of it. Like we had folk that had never played John Company at all. And had no sort of understanding of what they were getting themselves into, which was one of the things that creating the families so that you're already a part of a group. And one of the things that we try to do as we set up the groups was make sure that there were one or two players that were familiar with the
Right.
game in each of the families, so that there was somebody that could communicate what was going on. And then they were allowed to sort of have that family dynamic where you feel like, okay, I am safe within my family, so to
Right,
speak,
yeah.
though of course the family can also stab you in the back in John Company. But all of that to say, just like really trying to make sure that we gave the players what they needed to make sure that they felt like it was safe, but also to feel like they could express what the game was saying, without sort of censoring.
Right.
so to speak.
Safe within the possibility space of the game.
Yeah.
Something that I think only literally just hit me while you were talking a second ago about board state and library archivism, and that they are almost overlapping in concepts, right? Like you can, looking at a board at the end of a board game, picking up a box of letters is in trying to reconstruct what happened.
Yes.
Feels like almost identical pursuits to me.
Welcome to the story of my life. Eh?
I'll keep talking then.
No, I think the librarians are. I should also state that I am not a librarian, and so I have a history in libraries, but I am not a librarian,
Sure.
and so I have to be careful when I say things because I say it like absolutely. It's
Can
like,
I
hey,
actually can I
librarians,
ask a
we're not
question
like-
about that? Because
Sure.
you're not the first person I've heard to very clearly state in a like, this is not legal advice kind of tone that they're not a librarian. Is there
A guild that's going to come get you?
yeah,
I think the thing is that there's library sciences, and people that have studied library sciences, I have extreme respect for, and they do Lord's work. You know, that's from my perspective.
And to be
like,
clear, nothing
Yeah.
but like I think the libraries are incredible. I love the library here, but I do get a like
I think it's
pleased,
just- I think it's because what I was about to say is that librarians are very unique, like perspectives and characters, and that because of that perspective, is the reason that libraries are what they are. Like here's the
Yeah.
thing. Here's a trick for anybody out there. If you have not had an engagement, like a deep engagement with the librarian, is go to your library. Whichever librarian is there, go to your library. Like this is why I have to make the clause, because I say these broad, wide, sweeping things, and it's like, dude, you're not a library. Stop it. But go to your library and go just walk up to one of the librarians and just ask them what they studied, and then have them walk you through what it is, like have them show you what's in the library based off of what they studied. And that's where you will find like the heart of what a librarian is. But the true soul of that is that they only have that becomes relevant. Like for the majority of librarians, that becomes relevant only a small percentage of what their working day is, of like, and so like them having the opportunity to even go to that depth is not something that every librarian is going to have the opportunity to do. And so like you're actually giving them a gift by doing that act. You're just like, hey, like, listen, just tell me what it is that you really love and why it is that you fell down this rabbit hole of whatever that topic is and whatever that beautiful thing is. And that to me is the like whole key to human knowledge is sort of represented in all of the multitude of librarian stories that you would get from that type of interaction. And that's what it is. I mean, we have the internet now and everybody think but like literally, if you are digital native, whatever it is, go to a library, find a librarian.
Stop everything, yeah.
Pause
And
this
go
episode.
and ask them, what is the topic that you really love? And show me what it is. Show me what you can about it within this library. And you will have the most amazing, like, eye-opening experience about humanity.
I will do this at some point, for sure.
Anyway, sorry, that was a big
so yes, let's go back to you. So you're not a librarian.
I'm not a librarian.
I couldn't force you to take me on a tour of your mind in a Borgesian kind of manner, I guess. But yes, so.
But that perspective really is what got me into board games and like what it is that. Like the library itself represents a system for organizing information. And then it's a matter of finding the thing that you want to organize in that system. And similarly, board games are systems for organizing information and organizing the interaction with information. And then the things that you want to organize that to be about, that's what designing is, is like, how are you going to put these organize this information through the systems to be able to tell the thing, whatever that thing is, to bring that to life at the table.
That makes sense. I think that's a really fascinating perspective. Is that like limited in your mind to board games or because there are, go ahead.
I'd say like that's probably the arts in general. Board
sure.
games as a medium, and like just in general, yeah. I think the arts is about that sort of type of translation. I just think that the systemic nature of board games is a lot, specifically of tabletop board games, where mechanics become so almost quantitative.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is a lot more. It's just a different type of space. Like, and that's what ties it to sort of libraries where it's like, it's quantitative. And like when you're in a library, there's a lot of quantitative aspects to what it means to keep a collection and what's in a collection and all of those things. And so board states are just quantitative states that you're sort of managing through interactions with the players.
I think what especially enamors me to this idea is that, like, not merely the games that I was just talking about, but countless RPGs and other board games where you're generating ephemera, right? Where you're taking notes, where you're doing things, where you have particular, you might even have like improvised like icons or meeples or something like that become a part of the game from external sources, but become very, very important to the process that the players go through. Being able to like preserve and chronicle that stuff that would otherwise just go straight into the trash, right? Is exactly. Really, really exciting to me.
It's also like, what's the word? I want to say founders art, but that's the wrong word. Not founders art.
I don't think I know that, even what that means, actually.
Sorry, I lost it.
That's okay. Right. Don't worry about it. I was go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go for it.
I was going to bring up, like, I think obviously like a really straightforward jump is thinking about the, I guess now kind of emerging video game genre of the database thriller of, Obra Dinn's Immortality, that kind of like, there is in some of those, they're literally an archive you are piecing down, and some are like viewing the world through this kind of systemic, like on one hand systemic, like what are the events that happen in what order and to whom, but also then the human, like a lot of the puzzle logic of, like, let's say, of Obradin is like, oh, this person is mad at that person, and so at one point in the night he came over and shot him on the ship or whatever. But I wonder, like, I feel like in kind of my instinct that there is a difference between that and a board state, and not in like a qualitative way, but in like they're different mediums, and so they feel like they produce the archival view in slightly different manners, I suppose. I don't know if I have a better way to describe it.
I think like one of the things that comes up for me when I start thinking about like that aspect is the board game sense of scale and what actually can be captured, right? And so like if you just go back to like John Company and you take the board state that's in John Company, there's ships that are out to sea, there are armies that are in India, there are individual pieces that are in offices, right? And those are multiple different scales, right?
And there's marriages, right? Like one-on-one,
one-on-one marriages, right?
Yeah.
And so this is like an affordance of the board game space, is that if you're able to define those systems in ways that interact properly, you can go between those scales and see how those things affect each other. But the sacrifice of that is the level of abstraction that has to happen. So when you take like John Company, where all of the family members are individual pieces, but it's being controlled by a single player, the abstraction of what those pieces represents is sort of out of scale of the player. You can't actually take the time to say that's Mary and that's Joe and because you just sort of have to manage all of those scales in one sense. And that's sort of one of the sort of impetus for the design of was really just to say, okay, but no, let's go down to that scale and have that inform how it goes up in the scale, right? Like, what is it that from that individual perspective that makes it important when you get up to the army that failed in their campaign in India, right? Like those, that being able to see it from that perspective as opposed to seeing it from the top down perspective gives it a whole new sort of meaning and layer.
I think there's also, and maybe this is like a way to start talking about Cross Bronx Expressway, but like there's the video game version of this really relies on hidden information, right? And when you're looking at a board game state, you kind of have perfect information, at least about like what the current state of things are, except when there's something at work, like a deck of cards or something like that, that has like possibility space within it that you know might come up, or if you're if you haven't memorized every card, like it's a game of Cosmic Encounter or something like that, a sense of like, well, something's going to happen, but I don't have any idea what's in there. And what got me thinking about Cross Bronx Expressway with that is like thinking about the way that you have positioned each of the different decades of like, these are things that can happen in the 40s. These are things that can happen in the 70s, and things are going to get real bad if you I cannot stress to anyone listening, stop this episode right now. Stop what you're doing and go look up Non-Breaking Space's end notes. Is maybe I'm not blowing smoke. This is maybe like the best single episode of a podcast I've ever listened to.
Thank you.
It's so good. You can find it pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts, but it is just, it's a 1 hour. It's you talking through like, here's who I am, and here's why I wanted to make a game about the Bronx, and here is why I designed it in this particular way. And it is just really, really good capture of like why all of that is put together and why it's designed the way that it is. And I'm really interested to talk to you about like that hidden information, right? Because now I know a lot more about the Bronx and the Cross Bronx Expressway and why it would be interesting to play that, but I still have no idea what's going to happen when I start playing from a different decade as opposed to another.
I mean, I think that's like that's again going back to the scale thing. the scale of the Cross Bronx Expressway, like the whole box is covering 6 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, how do you digest 6 decades of history?
Right.
And actually know,
I can barely
understand
process this decade of history.
Exactly. Right. So like, how do you take that in? How can you have a gaming experience where you walk away feeling like you have a sense of that history?
Mm-hmm.
And so the game itself covers all that time, but the sessions, what we call sessions, are 2 decades. And being able to take that amount of information, I think, is like, it condenses what the history is to that, just that specific scope, but it allows you to take away from it a better sense of like, oh, I can see what happens because of like the number of interactions that you're having in that time period, right? And so the events that happen in the deck or in the game, where there's 15 per decade and you'll only see 8 of them. And so that's a good random distribution around, like you have a sense of what it is, but you have no idea exactly what you're going to get.
And you're not going to see everything. It's not like you're one and done.
And yeah, exactly. You're not going to see it all. In the one of the booklets that come with the game, the historical record, it provides sort of the history of all of those cards, but also for each decade, it lets you know what proportion of the events are for which faction, and then the changes that happen in each of those decades. And that's really sort of modeling towards what's the history of that decade, is the level of change of the different pieces in the game that happen during that decade. So you can look at one decade and say, oh, it looks like in this decade, the odds are we're going to lose some infrastructure in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And you need to sort of have that, and which, by the way, is more information than any historical actor would ever have.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Like if and the people that you're playing, they have, I mean, they can start seeing the things coming, but they have no real idea about, oh yeah, over this next decade we can expect this number of infrastructure to go. Like that's not there. But for one, understanding the history and being able to understand how to play around with it, I wanted to sort of give that information. And so when a card is revealed and it destroys infrastructure, it exhausts the infrastructure, it's like, okay, what does this mean to us right now? Not necessarily, and what it means to you right now in the game as a sort of representation of what it meant within that decade. That's sort of like the sort of pull that the game is trying to get you towards. Is just like, okay, you're going to create your own sort of setup for what's happening on the ground, but you're going to have to deal with the impacts of the things that were happening historically.
Right.
And how does that affect what your choices have been?
Walk us through just like what are the player perspectives and I don't know, for someone who is, I guess unaware of Crossbones as a game, like
Again,
a typical dynamics or
stop listening to this podcast.
Yeah, definitely do what Brendan said.
But if you didn't listen to what I did, tell us, give us the top down.
So there's 3 factions in the game: public, community, and private. Public is basically all of the government and both state, from local all the way up to federal government, that has impacts on the Bronx. Private is all of the business interests, including like banks, not the landowners, the like building owners, not necessarily the landlords. There's a big distinction there, but those people that actually own the buildings. And then the community, which is everything from the local business owners, like the people that live in the city but also own this business, own this building, to the gangs that are out in the street, all being represented by this community faction. And so over the course of the game, the idea is the population that's there and the population that's moving in and out of the Bronx needs to be both housed and cared for. They need to have the means to be cared for. And the factions can do that by there's really 2 primary pieces. There's infrastructure and there's organizations. And infrastructure is basically everything that you need: food, clothes, and shelter in an area. Not necessarily directly provided by, it's not saying like, oh, the public is buying all your food, clothes, and shelter, but it's more in terms of like the infrastructure to be able to have all of that is being underwritten by one of the factions. And then the organizations are like groups of different either businesses, community groups, public service organizations that are in each of these districts to be able to handle the population that is there. And then throughout the game, what you're basically trying to do is mitigate, one, what we were just talking about, all of the events that happen historically that come into the play, but also you're trying to shape the Bronx itself, or the South Bronx itself, to sort of look like what that perspective's view of the area should be. So like for the public, they just want it to be, everything is clean, have our budget, and it's
everything
a perfect balance between
at the end of the year. Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect balance between our social and economic incentives, just like get that complete equilibrium. Can we do that? We could do that, right? That's not a problem. For the private, and this is one of the things that I think is it's like a first level of starting to grasp what the history is actually being represented, is that there's no profit to be made in the South Bronx during this period.
Right.
This is not the time that you're going to go and become Daddy Warbucks, like swimming in cash. Like there is no, oh my gosh, you could just make so much money off of this. Now, there are profit motives for investment in the Bronx, and that's kind of an abstraction that's hard to sort of grasp. Like, well, why doesn't the private just get out? And the private can't really just get out because, one, it's a scale, again, going down to the scale of the South Bronx. There's the rest of the city. This is all of New York City, and they have investments elsewhere.
And they're not leaving New York City completely.
And they're exactly.
Okay.
And so, but also there are incentives that they have in the city. So one of the things I love talking about in terms of New York is like, if you are a property owner, right, and you have low income housing in the Bronx, you can use those low income housing benefits for your taxes on your high income yield building down in the middle of Manhattan, right? And so maintaining that is like somewhat important for you to just make sure that you can offset the rest of the investments that you have across the area. Also, and this is sort of the history itself, the big thing in terms of like the building of the Cross Bronx Expressway, Major Deegan Expressway, Bronx River Parkway, all of these are major roadway projects that happened. Robert Moses was at the center of those. And it was really the transformation because this was the arteries that brought goods in and out of New York, right? And this is like much needed, but the actual benefits didn't happen in the Bronx. It's just through the Bronx. Everything goes through the Bronx. There's no actual stopover for it. And so it's just like, okay, this is just going to happen.
Well, and likewise, tax benefits are passing through in the same kind of like, money's sort of fake kind of thing. But yeah, it's not staying there. It's not sticky.
Exactly.
To say nothing for how many people it displaced.
And that's the offset of it, is that the displacement and even like the need to address this displacement, like there is no real incentive to do so. Like, why should Robert Moses take care of these people? He's already got his highway and it's doing what he's wanted to do.
Right.
Like, there's no incentive for him to actually do that.
Right.
Other than if it all goes under, then the rest of the city is in trouble.
Right.
And that sort of ruins the whole like balance of the whole city. So you have to sort of like keep it up because, again, the carrying the weight of it for the rest of the city would be devastating.
Right.
So those are the dynamics that are at play between the factions and how they're trying to like engage to sort of shape their idea. So the private wants to sort of just like say, hey, we can create these economic centers that are going to be great for everybody. And the community is like, hey, no, we can actually do this for ourselves. We don't really need you. If you just give us a little bit of space, we can do it. And public is like, look, you guys, just calm down. We've got it all under control. Do what we say. Okay. Just do what we say. And you get to play that out with your friends at the table.
I think
I'm going to do it.
Yes, I definitely will. I think it doubles with what we were talking about with the victory. What do the player inhabited positions in a game see as victory in John Company and High Society? In Cross Bronx Expressway, there's not one like it's a competitive game, so it's not shared victory, but it's not even like a shared victory view of victory, right? Like it becomes, I think that is sort of an underexplored dynamic of board game design, is like, you get money, you get points or whatever, right? And that's all fine, but it can be a really powerful I don't want to say like didactic tool, but you can say a lot, I suppose, with saying here is how you win.
Or more importantly, here's how we all lose, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it really reminds me of the more recent really good game, Molly House, which is about queer Georgians in the 18th century London trying to find community and throw parties and so on. We won't have to go all the way into it, but it's a competitive game. Like it is, but it's also a game about like throwing parties together and having fun and evading the literal morality police. And I've seen the designer Joe be asked like, why is it a competitive game? And in my view, this is not their answer, I think, but in my view, it's like, well, you're in a society that is a competitive society, and you have to actively break that goal that the mechanics will continue pushing you towards. You have to break that goal to do this other thing that you want to do. And I find it like when a game takes a victory condition seriously, I find it really interesting.
Yeah,
I think it's
to plus one that, like, with what I was saying about John Company before, about like, you know, you don't necessarily know how your opponent is going to be playing the game, and there's every chance that they might be working with you, but they might also be waiting to bankrupt the company or whatever. But what I really, really, really love about the way that the player factions, public, private, and community, are all split up here is that, like, from the jump, you kind of have an idea of what they're going to be after, right? You kind of have a sense of what their priorities are. They're not, they are who they say they are, right?
Absolutely. And I think I think one of the challenges that like, or to back it up even more, like there's this whole idea of victory and sort of like what board games, like how board games literalize winning is something that we've got decades and decades of baggage with. You know?
Yeah.
And so it's one of the, and I think that Crossbox Expressway really does challenge it. That like I think one of the things that has happened is, you know, I've played hundreds of board games. I think you all have played your fair share of games, and that carrying that with you sort of has this notion of like, I understand games, you know, and I understand how games are supposed to work. And this is my favorite is like, this is how games are supposed to work, right? And so you get introduced to a new game, and the immediate calculation is, okay, well, how do I win?
Right.
Yeah. And this is the hobby itself has sort of really honed in on this of like, well, how do I win? Okay, what's my path to victory? How many paths to victory do I have?
What's the most optimal path to victory?
What's the first thing you teach to a new player?
Yeah.
How do they win?
Right.
You got to teach them how to win, right? And like if that's not clear, then there's something that feels wrong or off with the game. Right. And this is the thing that I think this is the baggage that I'm talking about, is that the winning as the start is not necessarily, and working within the historical space specifically, though I think it has more broad implications than outside of the historical space as well. But within the historical space, you can't really win history,
right?
You know, like history this is what it is. And the notion of like, okay, well, I've got to find my optimal path to victory is going to really hold back what it is that you can get out of the experience. And so for each of the factions, they have 4 main objectives that score them victory points. And then there's 2 objectives that they have at the end of the game, right? That they can get bonus points for.
Right.
Now, this is without the position cards. We can talk about that if we want to later, but just those are the base sort of things. Now, players should not think that means they can score 4 points every turn or every decade. But that's the mentality that they go into, is like, oh, I've got these 4 objectives. I should be able to score all 4 of them. And I should be able to score the 2 at the end because I can get the perfect score, and that would be optimal play. So what is the optimal play to get me all of those points? And if you've gone into Cross Bronx Expressway with that type of mentality, 1, you're probably going to lose. and you're probably going to lose the game for everybody because it's a collective loss situation. And it's going to be really frustrating because the mechanical focus of how I win is distracting from everything that's happening in all of the interactions on the table. And so in some regards, that's sort of the challenge of Cross Bronx Expressway, is that it's not going to present itself of like, oh, here's the optimal path to victory, because what was the optimal path to victory in the 1970s in the South Bronx? Right. What does that mean? What does that actually mean?
But it is important that the game tells you, hey, you are the government of the city and the state. Like it's like wine. It's like, picking up the pull string coming out of your back and like pointing you in a direction, and but the direction heads off a cliff
really quickly too.
Yeah. I've always found it really interesting with history games specifically, like you said, in Victory, but in general, historical actors don't know what they're doing. You can't win history. These are all like true statements, but a game kind of has to have an answer for all of those, which I find really, really fascinating.
It has to at least have an endpoint, right? Like,
right, yeah,
a resolution.
It has to have a resolution. It has to have a starting condition of some kind. I know Cole Worley has described games, or his view of games, as like historical fiction. It kind of is how it is, but it could have sort of gone these other different ways. But yeah, it's a really, like, I think hopefully something that in the coming years we can really start thinking about in more, not more interesting ways. That sounds wrong, but just thinking about like, well, these are lines drawn in the sand that have to mean something because the game has to kind of be coherent.
I mean, I think that's the thing where board games really are behind. Like RPGs and video games have solved this years ago. Like if you think about like those, like and it's really just like the conceit of like, hey, there's an experience that I want to have that goes beyond whether or not I get to the final completion metric, right? And that as a player is just like, it's a new mentality for board games, because a lot of what board games are about is confining experiences to get to this resolution in a specific time frame with this number of players, where that you can help, that this is the victor at the end of the game, and that setup is really limiting in terms of what games can express and what games can do. And I mean, I think there's a lot of more exploration in there, but there's a lot, like I said, video games and RPGs have like solved this a long time ago and have shown that there's so much more depth and breadth that can happen once you start taking that sort of shifted perspective on what the experience needs to be.
Yeah, there's, a pretty popular strain in RPGs, at least indie RPGs, to play to lose, stuff where... going in, a lot of them are horror games, unsurprisingly, but like knowing, hey, like you're not coming out of this alive, or worse on the other side of it, right? And those are a lot of fun. I struggle to think of like a board game that matches that same kind of experience. I'd love to be told if someone listening knows
Antiquity,
Diplomacy,
the Splattergate. Oh, diplomacy.
Yeah. Most spotter games are you very much start losing and then try and lose the least. How to stop.
I have not played Antiquity. I'm looking at it now. It looks fun.
It's basically, I'm build a city. Oh, everybody died.
I'm buying this right now.
It's kind of like I like Feast for Odin. I love Feast for Odin because you start with negative points. And like the whole game is like, how do I not have negative points? Beat everybody and you'll stop having negative points.
Or I guess if you're playing Consulting Detective and you're actually tracking your points versus Sherlock's, and you wind up with like
Mhm.
negative 200 points. Yeah, that's play to lose. I never do that.
Of course not.
Yeah,
I want to win.
I mean, it's just like this games are like beautiful things, and there's just a lot of beautiful things that I think people can start doing with them once we sort of open up that space. Like once we sort of allow for these different type of expressions. And again, like I said, it's happening a lot more. I think there's a lot more examples of people doing that. It's just like making sure that we aren't shutting people down, like shutting people down for that. I think one of the things that I was talking to a designer this once, and they had designed a game, and people told them like, oh, you have to change it like this and change it like that and change it like this in order to be able to make it accessible to the audience. And I'm just like, that is not what we need to be saying. Like this is not how we are going to really see what games can do, is if we're shutting down just other people's expression or making everybody's expression fit into these boxes. Like that's the opposite of the direction that we need to be going. And that doesn't mean that like every game has to like get published or anything like that, but just sort of like allow for those little quirks and expressions to try and do things differently. And players really just allowing for, hey, I'm going to sit down to this and have a different experience than what I could if I just pulled the game that I know off my shelf.
Right.
I mean, it speaks to why the victory conditions are so, or have been traditionally very dry and boring. Is fitting into the box. And yeah, it's I think it's hard for players who are not used to that like style of interpretive play, right? Or like inhabited play, or a semi RPG kind of thing, where a board game is a system to find the optimal route to victory, not trying to carefully milk my friend for like a negotiation position to do this thing, because that's what I would have done if I was in the East India Company or working in the South Bronx or whatever.
But I think the thing that's interesting, and this goes back sort of to the library thing, is that the systems of board games and all these mechanics, like that's the added layer like that you don't get in an RPG. And video games are a little bit different. You can kind of take a video game in as wide or as narrow of a direction that you want. But specifically in RPGs, a lot of the mechanical differences between what happens in an RPG and what happens on a board game, if you opened up the board game space to sort of explore ideas the way that RPGs are, that mechanical underlying creates an amazing depth of like what can happen, right? And it also frees the player up from where they can put their decisions, like where their decisions are happening. So like that's the great thing about the John Company experience, is that it really freed the players up to sort of think about their decisions in a different way, because the board is going to take care of itself. Like, oh, you make this decision and the board, this piece moves here, that moves there, this does that, that triggers this. All of that is there. So now your mindset is more on, okay, but how do I feel about rolling these dice?
Right.
Yeah.
Like what is my motivation for,
you see the result of the system and you go, why would the Sykes family do that? Like what is going on over there? Like I could literally walk over and ask, what are you doing? But then you see the expressions on their face change as they know I'm blue and they're pink, and
Yes. So like that the mechanics of board games are amazing for that, right? Amazing for just like keeping the rules succinct and intact, and like you have a sense of what's going to happen or what the chances are and all of those things. And that being there frees you up from like in a role-playing game where it's like, okay, now I have to creatively think of how I'm going to do this thing, right? And what's the creative way for that I can actually get to roll my dice. You don't have to worry about that,
right?
Like these are the ways that you can do this. That you don't have to come up with that. It's really like focus on, okay, what does it mean for you to do this right now? Why are you making this choice right now with the odds that you can see right here? Why are you still saying, I think I'm gonna go for it? Like that's what I'm gonna do. And that spillage is just like an amazing, like there's just so much opportunity there, and there's so much that that players can experience there, that I just want more players getting to that place. You know?
Yeah. Do you see yourself doing an archivist stream for Crossbox Expressway?
Crossbox. Well, actually, it's already kind of in there. The one of the rules that I literalized was just sort of something that I'd always did when I played coin games. For those who don't know, Cross Bronx Expressway is like second cousin or second nephew to the coin series, something like that. And
Related.
it's related to the coin series. But one of the things that I always did when I played coin series is that when you didn't trigger an event, you kept the card. So as opposed to just being a discard pile at the end, you have this card of the things that you had, of the things that you acted on from the game. And so that I literalized in Cross Bronx Expressway as every player has their own record, which are the cards that they triggered the event on. So you can sort of look back at the end of the game and it's like, well, what did I do?
Right.
Oh, I look like I allied with them.
Yeah.
Why did I ally with them, and them? That's kind of against my interest, and maybe that's why I lost. That type of reflection you're able to do just by holding these cards into your hand. Mm-hmm. So I think to some degree that's the extent that I would want to go in that direction with Cross Bronx Expressway. But I think I'm always sort of thinking through what's the leave behind or what's that artifact that comes out of the play to be able to like reify the experience in some degree.
That's cool. It's got like a deck builder hidden inside of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would love to be handed a box of the Archivist stream letters. just literally go, okay, just here it is. Here are the letters, and then try and go, what on earth happened?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find one randomly.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
If I can find them. Hold on. There we go. Let's just pull one out at random. Okay. 1764. That bastard Harry Larkins. I spent 50 years of my life, my youth, as dutiful writer, patiently waiting for my dues. The presidency is all I ever wanted. It's all I've worked towards. And what does he do? Give it to the new blood. I'd be surprised if Matilda can tell her head from her derriere. Now my youth is behind me and my future is bleak. I need more wine. Charlotte Hastings.
You ever just get a perfect portrait of someone?
Yeah.
Just where you can get their entire deal.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I mean, I can imagine, I can like simulate the game before and after that to some degree, which is good.
And that's again, like that's something that you wouldn't get from the board state.
Yeah.
Like you can't look at the board state and see that happen, right? It's like, this is why I did it. I love just sort of being able to look at these and say, oh man, this is great.
Yeah. I am very excited to play at some point.
Yeah, me too.
And where can people find you on the internet, or if you want something you have to, do you have something you want to plug?
So you can find me NBSP, which is what Non-Breaking Space is, NBSP 1618.games. That's just sort of like me on the internet.
This is a cool website.
And thank you. It's just a spreadsheet, basically.
Yeah, rules.
You're talking to two game designers. The spreadsheet is the highest form of organization.
Exactly. But that'll give you a good picture in terms of like what I've done and what I've got cooking. Though I will say it is truncated for brevity.
You've got a Vietnam game kind of in the works, right?
Yes. So Combat Commander Vietnam is one of the games that is currently on pre-order for GMT Games, and let me tell you, like, it's probably the highlight of my career so far is being tapped to sort of do this game. Okay. Combat Commander is a classic series from GMT, like one of the top sellers from GMT of all time. It was designed by Chad Jensen, who is literally my favorite designer. And then basically Gene Billingsley at GMT sort of knew me for long enough and was like, yeah, this is something that MB may be interested in. And I was like, oh my
That's a nice
gosh, I can't
thought,
believe
yeah.
this. But in order for me to do it, I had to bring Stephen Rangazas, who's the designer of the British Way and the Guerrilla Generation, Sovereign of Discord. I had to bring him into it. I literally, Gene asked me, and I'm like, hold on, I gotta make a phone call. And I had to call to see if Stephen would do it. So that's something that we're working on together. It is it's a big one, but I think it's going to do for that series, like, we are trying to really both honor Chad and show what the system itself, like the breadth of what the system can capture by pointing it at Vietnam. So really excited for that one.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.